Crystal Brown, and I'm the board chair of Educate Our State and also one of the co-founders. And I also wanted to mention that often people stop me in the hallway and say, "No, what exactly are you doing?" And our goal is very simple. We know that large-scale change only happens when people rally around an issue. And when the women wanted the right to vote, it wasn't until they got out in the streets and demanded it. And it's amazing in this election cycle right now, what would it be like if women didn't have the right to vote? What would the electorate be like? And we're sort of at that same moment with education, that it's time to stand out in the streets and rally around this really important value and issue that we all hold, public education. And this, you being here today, shows your commitment, your shared values, and that you're taking a stand. So again, thank you for being here and participating. But the only way we're going to make real change is if we can grow to over 1 million supporters. And today is the step in that direction. We know that we need to be the loudest voice. We need to make sure we're being heard in Sacramento, and that we're being heard by our legislators and by the public in California. So that's our goal, and that's what we plan to do. I want you for a minute to picture what it's like when your kid goes to school in the morning, or your niece or your grandchild. That bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, excited kindergartner that wants to learn. And they get to school and they're met by that rock star teacher like Kat Klein with tons of energy and clean books and amazing technology and art and music and PE and all the things that I want for my daughter. And I want to let you know that just isn't the case around the state. And I think that you're all well aware that we're just not there yet. But that's what I want for my daughters, and that's what I know we can provide for every kid in this state if we work hard enough. So that's where we're headed.
So my name is Kelly Corrigan, and I'm a writer, but today I'm a mom. And I have 2 girls who are in public school over in the East Bay. I am a product of a great public school system, and my husband is a product of a great public school system as well. I hope that you will remember today. I hope that you will say someday that you went to the very first luncheon for Educate Our State way back when we were 48th in per pupil expenditures, and now we're #1. That's what I hope you say. Things change because people attach to them. Influential people, smart thinker type people, donors and volunteers, people who show up for lunch with a little bit of curiosity. That's how things change. That's how they've always changed. It's the only way they change. So I'm excited to introduce you to 2 such people today. The first is Delaine Eastin. Daly Eastin, who you saw in the video, was an early supporter of Educate Our State and has always been, since the very beginning, a tireless advocate on behalf of children and public education. Beginning in 1994, she began her role as the California State Superintendent for Public Instruction, a role she held for 8 years.
This is the most important room you could be in this afternoon in California, because this is a place where change is going to not just spark, it's going to catch fire. And we're going to go out of here together, and we're going to lock arms, and we're going to fight for the education of our children, all of our children, and move California to the heights again. So just so you know, I graduated from high school in '65, and we were 5th of the 50 states. And those people that did that were Democrats and Republicans who had gone through a depression and a war, and they figured out how to put their children first, and we have to do that again in California. And we have to do it for every child in California, whether they look like us or not, whether they speak English at home or not, whether they're rich or whether they're poor or whether they're from dysfunctional families or not. The fact is that great civilizations arise from the imagination and hard work of people who are nurtured by their societies to develop their gifts. In a word, education. Education, the place where personal and social responsibility come together for personal and social greatness, both together. And we in this state have to make it possible for every child to get that opportunity for a great future. We must be mindful that in our quest for high standards and for student performance in our subject areas, we also must not neglect other critical disciplines that impact learning. The right brain is important and the left brain is important. Never forget that Bach was a mathematician, and many of our scientists who've won the Nobel Prize have a deep background in the arts. They are both important. At the end of the day, we have to begin a new age of improving the education of the children of the great state of California, just as we had to move a lot of other mountains in history. I want to quote Bill Moyers, who said, "For all the rhetoric about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it took a civil war to free the slaves and another 100 years to invest their freedom with real meaning. Women only gained the right to vote in my mother's time. New ages don't arise overnight." But put somewhat differently, don't forget what Susan B. Anthony said, who said, "Cautious, careful people, always casting about to preserve their reputation and social standing, can never bring about a reform." I want you to stop being cautious and careful and fight for the kids of California like you've never fought before. I can't think of any better way to do this than coming together on a day like today. And I want to just remind you that what we're doing here isn't as hard as founding a country. It's not as hard as fighting a civil war. It's not as hard as the Marshall Plan or the Manhattan Project. But it's every bit as important as any other undertaking we've ever done in the history of the world. And yes, it'll be hard. But when John Kennedy was proposed we go to the moon before the end of the 60s, some of you weren't born, I'm sorry to say, but some of the old souls in the room remember that they made fun of Kennedy. They said, "Mr. President, that schedule is too ambitious. Mr. President, that is just too hard a goal." I'm not telling you what we have to do in California is easy. I'm telling you it's hard. But to stay where we are today is just an embarrassment. Look, in most of America, the average child has for every 1,000 students, there are 124.7 adults in the school. In California, it's 70. We have the fewest number of adults per student in the schools of this state. The reality is we're second to last in the number of principals and administrators. A lot of people will tell you, oh, the reason is we're top-heavy. We're not top-heavy. We have the largest class size and among the fewest number of administrators. We are dead last in guidance counselors. Not only in guidance counselors, we're dead last in psychologists. Does it mean we don't have any kids that have need of counseling? The reality is that all across this state, we're 51st in the number of librarians. And so, in fact, we have the worst library book collection in the country. We have books that say, "Someday man will go to the moon." And we did that before most of you were born. The truth be known that is in the last 4 years, there are only 3 states that have cut more than 20% of student funding: South Carolina, Arizona, and California. How do you feel about them apples? Some of you know that when I went away to Davis in 1965, my parents wanted a new car. They had a 55 Studebaker, and they stopped making them in 1960, also before most of you were born. The truth is that my dad was afraid he couldn't get parts for the car, and my mother wanted a new couch, and they wanted to go to a family reunion. And you know, budgets of a family are a statement of values. You know what they did? No car, no couch, no Kentucky trip. They sent their daughter to college. That's what I'm saying. California has to get its priorities straight. No fancy peripheral canals, no high-speed rails until we do the most basic and most important thing, and that's to educate our children from preschool to graduate school, to make sure that every child that enters a school in California feels, in fact, supported. Look, the reality is 42% of our kids entering school today, 50% of our kindergartners, but 42% of the children overall speak a language other than English at home. We ought to have a campaign in this state to do dual language immersion for all kids so that every English-speaking kid is learning a second language and every non-English-speaking kid is learning English. So I have to tell you, when asked to be here today, I couldn't think of a more important place for me to be. I'm a private citizen in California, but my heart is in the schools. And I'll just tell you that you can't call yourself a patriot and not support our children. You cannot not fight for education and call yourself an American patriot. End of the day, we have got to do a much better job. And I want to say this to you. I'm sick and tired of hearing people blame the teachers for what's happening in California. Be very clear, I can name many great teachers and a couple of poor ones. And I do believe we ought to do a better job of assessing the poor teachers and moving them out. And most of the teachers I know believe that too. But at the end of the day, don't look now, we just laid off 40,000 teachers in California in the last 4 years. I will tell you we should go back to 20 or less in K-3, but we also ought to reduce class size across the board in the state of California. The classes are too big for such a diverse group of poor students. 20 years ago, 1 out of 10 poor kids in America was in California. This afternoon, 1 out of 6 poor kids in America is in California. And our solution is to cut the schools? I'm sorry. I want to leave you with this really important thought. And many of you who've heard me speak know my favorite quote is Neil Postman, who said, "Children are a message we send to a time we will never see." Constitution of the state of California says the #1 priority, even before the payment of debt, shall be the education of our children. Let's hold the legislative feet to the fire and the governor's feet to the fire and fight for the children to get the priority the Constitution of the state of California demands they be given it. Another generation did it for us. We should do it for the next. Thank you all very much.
Right from his acting and directing and producing, and he's come up from LA to share his time with us today. You probably saw him on Private Practice and his Emmy-nominated role in The Sopranos. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to my new boyfriend, Tim Daly.
Oh my goodness. First of all, thank you all for having me here. I have to say that I'm surprised and delighted to see that I'm not the only Y chromosome in the room. I had a fear for a moment that I would be swimming alone in a sea of estrogen, but I'm not, and I think that's a good thing for everyone involved. So what I really want to say is, like Delaine said, but I'll say some more. So I'm president of this organization called the Creative Coalition, and we are primarily an arts advocacy organization. Our core issues are advocacy for the arts, for instance, the National Endowment for the Arts, and arts education. So one of the things that we do is go to the conventions, and I've been through 2 cycles now, and we try to find political political people who will be our surrogates, people who agree that arts are a vital part of our education system and of our culture, and we try to get those people to spread the word amongst their constituents. So I found myself at the conventions this year, and I have to admit that I'm pretty cynical about it at this point, because I recognize that it's just a big pageant and not a lot happens not anything really happens that you're surprised by, except maybe Clint in that chair. That was weird, man. That was really weird. But one thing jumped out at me. At the Republican convention, Condoleezza Rice said, and I'm going to quote this from memory, she said, "The crisis in K through 12 education threatens the very fabric of who we are." And I thought, damn, wow, that is a bombshell she just dropped. That is a really cutting remark that goes right to the point of something that is critical to the future of this country. And so I went home and I turned on the TV and I expected the talking heads to be talking about it. And then I opened the newspapers and I expected there to be something about it in the newspaper. And there was something about Condoleezza Rice having spoken. But this is what I heard. Well, I'm going to try to do my cricket imitation. No, I can't do it. My mouth is dry. Anyway, I heard nothing. And I thought, that is amazing that she has put her finger so precisely on such a crucial issue for this country, and no one has picked that up, no one in the media. So, experiment, like a work of art, begins with imagination, with imagining something better and bigger and more amazing. So I want to make it clear that I'm not, and the Creative Coalition is not, advocating that we train a bunch of artists. That's not the point. The point is to train creative thinkers. So whatever they do, whether they're politicians or lawyers or doctors or people who are working on stem cell research, approach it in a more creative and imaginative way. And it pertains to this organization, who I'm newly acquainted with, that this is a fantastic organization, and you are doing the exact right thing, as I perceive it, because this is what you're doing. I have one mother, 3 sisters, 6 nieces, and they are all mothers. And if there's anything I know deeply and intimately, is that when you piss mothers off, shit gets done. So keep going. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.